Hi, and welcome to the Little River Healthy Watershed Collaborative. My name's Jean Pillow. I work for the Eastern Connecticut Conservation District, and my co-worker Maura Roby, who is also here. We'll be giving this presentation and going through the agenda as we go through what we're working on in Little River, what's going on. First of all, what is a Healthy Watershed Collaborative? It's an effort to people who share visions and goals for water quality in Little River Watershed, which is mostly in Woodstock, but extends into Thompson, Putnam, Pomfret, and even into Southwest Massachusetts. Government agencies, nonprofit organizations, and individuals to get together and talk about what the water quality conditions are and collaborate on ways to improve it where it's needed and protect it where that's the focus. So there's been a lot of different organizations involved in this effort for the past several years, and we're continuing to go forward with this effort. How it works, we get together periodically and update each other on what's been going on in the Little River watershed and talking about water quality concerns. And then we collaborate, and there's been a lot of that's happened. So there's always an opportunity for people to become involved in this initiative. All you have to do is send me an email and I'll get you on the list of people to invite to the next meeting. This is today's agenda that sent out. So all the different people who've been notified that we're having this meeting, and whether or not they can participate or not, we still want to talk about their role in one of the big projects that we're working on currently. Here's an update. Dan, you want to talk about this project? I've been working on it for so long.
Sure. So this is a project at a farm in Watershed, Woodstock, and on the right is a freestall barn with manure, agricultural waste storage and management facilities, and on the left is a new silage bunker that we installed. The silage bunker was completed last spring, and the new freestall barn and the waste storage management facilities is nearly complete. The cows have been moved back into the barn, so we're very excited about that. And this particular site drains into Maybrook and Peckenbrook, and then into Roseland Lake.
And I heard a rumor, Dan, that the first calf born in this new facility has, instead of a number, it has a name. They named it Danielle. So congratulations.
Yeah. My name's not Danielle, but that's a possibility, I guess.
So that's the last big project that we have planned, implementation project in the watershed for now. But
Jean, I'm sorry. I just will add that the funding from this project came from Connecticut DEEP's 319 Clean Water Act grant, and then the producer's EQIP funds, and the producer also contributed some funding as well as in-kind services.
Very good. So this brings us into the current project that Maura and I are working on together, and it's a project that's made to update the Little River, Muddy Brook Little River Water Quality Improvement Plan that was done in 2009. So Maura, would you like to speak on this?
Yes, thank you, Jean. Good morning, everybody, and happy almost spring. I'm excited about that. So just to review this Connecticut Source Water Protection Project, as you can see on the map, that's the Little River Watershed. Outlined in blue, there's actually 4 sub-watersheds there depicted. So you see most of it in Woodstock, and then you have a little bit in Pomfret and Putnam and Thompson, and then a small piece in the northern section in Massachusetts. So I just wanted to let folks know that this update is being funded by NRCS through a Connecticut Source Water Protection Grant, and also some additional Regional Conservation Partnership Program funds are being used from NRCS as well. So as Jean said, there's a 2009 existing Muddy Brook Little River Water Quality Improvement Plan that addresses impairments in the watershed, with a focus on agriculture, but with other sources also listed. Of course, it's a drinking water watershed. So as far as the National Water Quality Initiative, or what we call NAQWI, that is to address impaired water bodies through voluntary NRCS practices. So NRCS updated the requirements for the NAQWI designation since this plan was written. So we need to update the plan. So that's why we're working on it. And it's very important because we want to restore dedicated funds for farmers in the watershed so that they don't have to compete with the rest of the state of Connecticut. So that's a really good thing they've been able to take advantage of, and we want them to continue to do that. So this is a 2-year project, started in September 2020, and it's going to be ending this September. We've been seeking engagement from farmers and small farms, horse owners, homesteaders, etc., so that we can help assist with any kind of assistance they may need for animal health, soil health, and natural resource health and improvements. Next slide, Jean. So as far as progress, there are a number of different categories in the plan. So for outreach and education, we've actually been doing quite a number of things. Last fall, we were able to hold a farmer talk series at the Connecticut Grange, thanks to Amy Monahan for partnering with us on that, as well as the Woodstock Agricultural Commission. They were able to give it, do some funds, provide funds to put some ads in the Turnpike Buyer for this talk series. And we had some really great speakers talking on manure and nutrient management, grazing animals, forest management, as well as soil health, which that particular talk had the most number of people. Almost 30 people attended that talk, and the other talks, the numbers were in the teens. So we felt like it was a very successful talk series. You know, we did some flyers and a press release to get the word out for that. And we also did it in a hybrid format, which was really great, so that folks could either come in person or online. So I think that worked really well. And also created a farmer survey. So far we've received 8 responses. We'd really like to get more, but of those 8, 5 were hobby farms and 3 were homesteads. So we asked different questions like, what type of farm did folks have? You know, what kind of livestock? Did they have water quality concerns? And if so, what were some of the barriers for them to do something about that? And half of the people said that financial was a barrier. So I think, you know, having this dedicated funding would be really helpful in that sense. So as far as, we also asked what kind of conservation practices, particularly from NRCS, or improvements would you like to see? And the top 3 answers were manure management, plant health, and healthy soils. So all great things. And we asked folks also, like, what types of outreach do they really, you know, feel comfortable with? A lot of them said social media or regular mail, and demonstration projects at farms was another thing folks pointed out. So we also let folks know that we could do free farm evaluations, and I believe we got at least 1 person, maybe 2, that took us up on that. So we definitely would like suggestions from you all in ways to get other farms to take or farmers to take the survey. I think we would really do well to have a lot more responses. So we do have a QR code that folks can literally take the survey on their phone, and it, you know, it takes probably 5 minutes, or a link, and we can send that out after this meeting. So moving on, we were able to attend 2 outreach events. One in the summer was held by the Connecticut Grange, and one of the locations, it was a buy local event promoting local agriculture and products. And so at Chase parking lot, we set up there, and we were able to have this tri-fold display that you see in the bottom picture that we created. And we gave out handouts, and we had the farmer survey QR code available, and we had a sign up for the Grange Talks there as well. And the other event was the Celebrating Ag, which is a great family-oriented, low-key event that we always like to do. So we had this mini model farm you see at the top, which was Jean's brainstorm idea, and we put in a little signage of all the different NRCS practices that folks could incorporate and where they would go on the farm. So things like riparian buffers, gutters on barns, cover crops, those kinds of things. So that was a hit with the little kids. So that was a neat thing to do, and we'll be able to pull that out again for other events. So, and then we also have some sources for outreach and project information on our ECCD website. We created a fact sheet, social media account, as well as a MailChimp email list. And hopefully you all are on that email list. If not, let us know, and we'll get you on there. So next slide, Jean. So some other updates for progress on research, data gathering, and analysis for the plan. You know, thanks to NRCS state office folks, the GIS folks in particular, that gave me some good information to get some summary data, as well as Bill Purcell at the Danielson office. So I'm going to have a table of NRCS practices planned in the Little River Watershed from 2019 to 2022. Of course, being more of a summary with no personal information shared for that. And then currently we're looking at models to get phosphorus and nitrogen load reductions by land use. So we can do that analysis. And looking at trying to get the greatest reductions for dollar amount spent. That will be helpful as this goes into implementation phase for NRCS folks to know kind of what's the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. We also have lists of likely practices that have been accepted by farmers in the past, and you know, all of that outreach was wanting to get that information from farmers. You know, what kind of practices are they willing to do? We also are in the process of creating maps, lots of maps, hay, corn, and pasture identification. Again, looking at this riparian buffer gap map, it's very zoomed out, so there aren't any particular area farms identified, but just sort of giving an idea of areas to focus on. So farmsteads that may have proximity to water, conserved farmland, soils. We were lucky enough to get a great GIS volunteer who created 3 maps, including steep slopes, this riparian buffer gaps map, and field drainage ditches. So, you know, these again will be helpful in looking, you know, what are the places to really focus on for future implementations for NRCS and us. And lastly, we need to do an outreach strategy plan for the implementation phase, as I said. So what we will have in this plan will all be assessments. And so then we need to have an implementation. And so We did come up with some ideas. We want to continue the Farm Talk series. We want to expand the social media use. We're looking at maybe farm tours and then targeted mailers, but we definitely would like your input as well. And we need it for this to help inform the project. So, you know, please reach out to us and that will be great. Next slide. So this is progress update that Gina's been working on. So I'm going to let her talk about this.
Well, there's a lot of data that needs to be gathered as part of any watershed-based planning effort. So we've been doing everything from looking at the land cover and characterizing the watershed. So what you see a couple of different pie graphs on the right-hand side of the screen. Those represent different kinds of land cover in the watershed, and there's two different pie graphs there. One of them is for the Little River area that's above Putnam's diversion from Little River in South Woodstock. And the other one is for the entire watershed that extends all the way to the Quinnebog River in Putnam. So really, the focus is on the source water protection area that's above Putnam's drinking water. But we want to make sure we are not leaving out substantial amounts of farmland. So I did the calculations and it was determined that there's 127 acres of agriculture in the Little River watershed, but below the Putnam intake. So, and the home farm for that land, who manages that land, is in the watershed. So we will be able to cover both. So we're looking at the water quality conditions, hydrology in the watershed, trying to realize what we can really accomplish with this plan, again, focusing on agriculture, and talking about what the at-risk public water supply system is, which would mostly be Putnam, but not entirely Putnam, because there are people who live in Woodstock, although they don't get their water from the Putnam drinking water supply, they do get their water from wells, and those wells have the potential to become contaminated from some other sources, including agriculture. So that's something that we're considering as well. This was an interesting observation. Since the 2009 plan was published, there's been a decline in active dairy farms in the watershed. In the 2009 plan, we mentioned that there were 8 dairy farms in the watershed that had over 150 cows. That was the categorization that was used at the time. We're down to 4 active dairy farms in the watershed where the farmstead is in the watershed. And there's another one that farms in the watershed, but their farmstead, their operation is over the hill on the other side, draining into the Quinnebog River. So that's a big change since 2009. We've seen a lot of land preserved with agricultural conservation easements since 2009. And that means that there's the potential to maintain agriculture in the watershed. There's less of a threat for that land to go to other uses, but obviously the farms have to be profitable to use that land, and we want to make sure that that remains the case. We see more pasture raised beef where there was once dairy farms. There's an increase in pork production. There's more community supported agriculture projects, both vegetable and meat. That's a change. There's a big increase in local farm markets to sell to people locally, which again is a way to maintain the profitability of these farms. And I think that's important to note that it's so far seeming to be supported. There are horse boarding operations in the watershed that's also under agriculture. And there's, I think, more hobby farms with livestock. We did one of the activities that Maura and I worked on was a windshield survey to try to locate where all these livestock operations are, whether it's someone with one horse in the backyard or registered farms. You know, we made a updated list of agricultural activities in the watershed so that, you know, we can substantiate what we're saying. So those are changes between 2009 and now. And now we're in the business of trying to predict what the demand for NRCS funds are. And that's where we really need to do more outreach and find out from these farms what might they need, because we don't want to have too much money set aside because it can't be used anywhere else in the state, but we don't want to have not enough. So that's where we're asking for some guidance from people, help in getting this information so we are not missing out on opportunities that we want to represent in this plan. Moving on from that plan, I want to talk about this. This is something that was unfortunate, but in 2018, we did the Roseland Lake Management Plan, and I discovered an error in that plan when I was using the plan to get data for this new plan. And it was a transcription error made by the consultant that we hired, and I didn't notice it, and it wasn't noticed by the DEEP reviewers, but essentially, it really didn't change a whole lot in the Roseland Lake Management Plan. It did say that there was less impact from urban runoff, which makes sense when you have less than 8% urban area in a watershed, and it significantly increased the amount of calculated load of nutrients going into Roseland Lake from agricultural sources. And once the model was corrected by the consultant, our field data actually matched the expected outcome, which makes sense. So it still remains that Maybrook, Peckham Brook, North Running Brook, and Muddy Brook below Woodstock Road are the priority areas, and that's the heart of the Woodstock Agricultural Valley above Roseland Lake. And it still shows that the internal loading of phosphorus, that's the legacy phosphorus that's come down over hundreds of years in the bottom of Roseland Lake, is still contributing a major amount of phosphorus in the summer to the lake, which is feeding the algae blooms. It went from 50 to 40%, but that's still enough to move the lake productivity level, the trophic classification, up one category. And we have situations in the summer where the lake is highly eutrophic and there's cyanobacteria blooms, and that's a very major concern because cyanobacteria has the potential to produce toxic byproducts of their metabolism that are harmful to mammals, including people and dogs, livestock. All right, Eric, I'm going to ask you to talk about this a little bit. This was on the agenda, the Roseland Lake total maximum daily load.
Okay, is there anything in particular you want me to talk about?
Well, you got the summary from Tracy yesterday. I guess you could just say what a total maximum daily load is and why we want one.
So based on Federal Clean Water Act requirements, our agency for the state of Connecticut is responsible for assessing water quality conditions across the state for all our water bodies, including freshwater lakes. And during those assessments, if we find that what we call our designated uses, one or more are not meeting the standards and criteria that we've set for the conditions that we expect, we consider those water bodies to be impaired or essentially polluted. And there's a requirement under the Federal Clean Water Act to do something about that by our state. Among other things, one of the approaches is to utilize the data that Gene and the district and others have been collecting, along with work that our own agency has collected within Roseland Lake and in the watershed, to determine what we would kind of consider a pollution diet or balance sheet of the lake, specifically for nutrient pollution that's causing accelerated eutrophication and other recreation impairments, as well as aquatic life impairments in that lake. And what all that means is that kind of the analysis that we do is under this process is referred to in an acronym TMDL, or total maximum daily load. And essentially it equates to what sometimes I call a pollution diet or balance sheet. And what we're trying to figure out is what are the levels of acceptable nutrients, as well as sediments, bacteria, some other pollutants. What are the acceptable levels that will still meet our water quality parameters that we need in that lake to be a functional lake under our water quality classification? And when we find that there are exceedances, if there's too much nutrient, too much bacteria, too much sediment loading that's impairing the water, we come up with analysis and calculations of what is required to reduce those numbers or reduce that amount down to manageable levels that still meet our water quality needs. And kind of that balance sheet, that diet that we establish is what we would refer to as TMDL. Now, the reason that we're bringing this up now here for this program and this work group is Connecticut has done a really phenomenal job in the last 10+ years now, looking at a couple other major pollutants of concern across the entire state, especially in freshwaters, looking at pathogens, bacteria, fecal bacterial pathogens that are affecting recreation use. And we have what we consider a statewide TMDL for the whole state of Connecticut for freshwater streams and other water bodies. And then we have a specific focused, like we'll call it a mini plan or a summary for individual water bodies, where we make recommendations of what can be done, including looking at tracking permits that might be affecting the loads of those pollutants in those water bodies, suggesting best management practices to address those loads. I mentioned the bacteria TMDL because that was our first attempt to look at this process statewide with the limited resources that we have available. And that model has worked really well. And we decided to pursue a somewhat similar process, looking at nutrients that are being exceeded in levels in our freshwater lakes. And we attempted to, and have successfully developed, a statewide TMDL for lake nutrients with a focus on the first kind of technical summary area in the western part of the state in a lake called Bantam Lake. And that process to develop the statewide nutrient TMDL, the analysis work, plus that focused area on that one particular lake, Bantam Lake, has now become a template for how we can pursue similar investigations and analyses, and working with groups like this group here in other freshwater lakes across the state of Connecticut that we consider high priorities to pursue. And Roseland Lake meets a lot of those short-listed high priority needs that we could probably address with our limited resources here in our agency over the next few years. Right now, Roseland is not listed this particular year for the development of that TMDL pollution budget, but we anticipate within the next couple of years we will be doing that analysis. And a lot of that will be based on the work that Jean and others have put together for the monitoring that's been done through her affiliation with the district, with the last Green Valley, also with the Roseland Lake Nutrient Management Plan that she just referenced a few minutes ago. All of that available data has been shared with our agency, and we are using that. Plus, we are looking forward in this upcoming spring, summer, fall season for our own agency that does a statewide water monitoring program. We're planning to do some lake monitoring ourselves to augment some of that work that Jean and others have put together. We don't know the specific schedule for that part yet, and we'll certainly be sharing that with Jean and others as that comes around. But the bottom line is we find Roseland, for a variety of reasons, to be a really important lake for us to look at nutrient management issues. That's why we used our federal grant funding a few years ago to help support the district's development of the nutrient management plan. And then we'll take that another step forward, building upon that process, plus the stakeholder involvement that all of you are helping us with, to develop this TMDL, which again will provide a really important roadmap to help this collaborative and others focus more, some of which you're going to look at agricultural inputs. Some of you will look at some of the urbanized land use activity inputs, stormwater runoff, lawn and fertilizer from residential area development management practices, and some other steps, preserved lands, riparian buffer protection areas. Those will all be elements that we can anticipate in this Roseland Lake TMDL, and in future meetings of this collaborative, I think we can share all of that. Look for your input to help us really fine tune our state effort, you know, coming out of our Hartford office to make sure it's appropriate and practical for what you need in your particular watershed. And within the next couple of years, I think we'll have some very good information that will help complement what you're all doing today. So I think that's the major part. The last piece of the bullet that Jean lists on the screen there about how local partners can assist is that, as Jean already knows, we certainly in our agency would be looking for water quality data, which Jean and others have already forwarded, but some of you may have other data, whether it's from the town of Putnam, whether it's from the upper Massachusetts community that is upstream of this whole system that may have done monitoring in the upper watershed. And if you have particular or suspected sources of pollution that's affecting Roseland Lake, whether it's directly in the lake area itself or the contributing watershed, we would certainly be very interested in knowing about those sources. You in the watershed, whether you work, live, play, recreate in that watershed, you know it better than anybody else. And we could certainly benefit, whether you utilize Jean's coordination or others, that kind of information, which we can then use with our field inspectors and our environmental analysts and others here to enter into this developing TMDL. So there's roles for everybody to play, and I hope in future collaborative meetings I can give a better update, or not better, but maybe a more forward update as far as where we've gone and where you can contribute as a collaborative to make it worthwhile for all of us. So Jean, I think that's the update I have.
Okay. Then the next item on the agenda was the new CAFO general permit. And I know Eric is not involved in this directly, but it is a new program DEEP has launched. I put it out there because it came into my email as, hey, new regulations, you have an opportunity to comment on it. Do you have anything you want to say about this, or I'll just say what I see?
Are you asking me?
Yes, Eric.
I don't have more to mention for people where this, I mean, some of the people on the call know what we're talking about with this confined animal feeding operation, or CAFO or CAFO permit. It's a general permit. It's being established by our state because of the authority given to us from federal EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. That program through EPA is actually, with regulations, has been in place for a very long time. And there have been some slight tweaks to it over the years. And somewhat recently, the state of Connecticut was given the authority to basically pursue what we consider, what we call a general permit. And entities that have, would be regulated under this general permit have a registration requirement for their operations, depending on the size of it. And then there's some reporting, some site inspection work by our agency, and some other things that would be falling into place under that registration process. It's a 5-year window. I believe right now the draft permit is still out for public commenting period. And if Jean hasn't shared that already, anybody on this call that's interested can either contact Jean or myself, and we can send you the link that explains what this is about. The idea is to look at the agricultural wastewater discharges that come from these confined animal operations in a couple different categories, including the areas where they're feeding. And we think that the process, which has been explored for over a decade with a lot of different types of potentially regulated ag producers, giving a lot of feedback for years. So this is not anything brand new for them. This is kind of going to hopefully complete the circle for what is now going to be under the general permit registration process. I don't know when it will become technically effective, but the date will be published, and when it is, then there's a requirement for those regulated to submit their registrations. Some of people have already been working on that and submitting them to us, and then basically they have a time frame when to submit those registrations, to have their facilities inspected, to start working on their reporting. And I think when some of that becomes available information, we can work with our agency permitting staff here to show how we could share that information, perhaps in general terms, for the Little River watershed, so that Gene and others can have a better sense of where these management measures are hopefully influencing water quality benefits, which is what a lot of us obviously on this call are interested in doing today. So more to be explained. We're deep in the process right now, and probably by the next collaborative meeting, we'll have more updates about an executed or signed off contract that, signed off general permit, which we can share more details as it comes out.
While you were talking, Carol did put up a link for anybody who wants to get more information. It's in the chat. So please follow up on checking out that link if you want more information. As I went through the threshold, the number of animals that are going to be covered under this permit, obviously there's probably no one in town with over 25,000 laying hens. So that's not going to be involved. The only agriculture that's possibly impacted by these regulations is the dairy farms. And I believe they've been working to prepare to be able to be ready for this. But if anybody has anything they want to say, you can unmute yourself at this time.
Eric, I have a question. If a CAFO permit is issued for a particular farm, do they become ineligible for Clean Water Act funds?
So the quick answer to you is it depends, and we really don't know the answer at this point. And for the rest of people on this call wondering what all that means, that's been a question between the conservation districts like Dan and Jean's and Maura's district that works with our agency that gets federal grant funding for non-point source pollution management projects. The reason I'm a little hesitant, I don't know the clear answer on this. It's a really important question to clearly figure out. And what we have guided some other entities across the state who are subject to the CAFO permit, who are also looking for grant funding to support some of their conservation measures under their comprehensive nutrient management plans. The answer to your question can be best resolved by submitting an application to us. And our grant program that I'm involved with in the Watershed program has one way of looking at that, along with our federal funding partner, EPA. The challenge to clearly answering this question is that the permitting part of our program, which is in a whole different bureau, is the one responsible for the CAFO permit and what's regulated under that permit. And trying to put these two pieces together to understand what is inside and outside of complying with that permit, and that what we're then available to offer for grant funding assistance, that's the kind of the needle threading that we need to figure out. And for people on the call who are following most of this, what we're trying to say is that the grant program that Dan is referring to through federal EPA, we cannot provide funding assistance for complying with regulations or enforcement matters. So what we're trying to figure out is whether or not this CAFO general permit registration, whatever is inside each individual registration, whether or not we can find activities and proposed measures that the ag producer wants to seek funding for through Connecticut Deep and others. And if we can claim that these are outside the compliance, then we might be able to support them. I think that it's going to take a cycle of a few grant submissions, application submissions, to clearly vet this out. And it's certainly a priority for our agency to look at least in our watershed program. So that's the long answer. And I'm hoping we can get even a better, clearer answer in the next several months. But it will depend on some other parts of our department, and then how federal EPA looks at the whole picture, because they're our federal funding partner for the particular grant program that Dan is referring to.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, I'll move on to the next slide. The requirements under the draft currently, general permit, are listed on the right side. The notice for this permit was issued on February 22nd, 2022. And there's a 30-day comment period, which ends on March 24, 2022. So if anybody wants to present written comments on the permit or ask questions, that's your period to do so. If there's enough people who want to have a public hearing, that could be scheduled, but that has to be, petitioned for. If you have comments, the person to send those comments to while he's still there is Joe Wetterman, who's about to retire, I guess. There's his address and his email address. So I just wanted to bring this up because I knew it was going to be an influence on the dairy industry in the Little River watershed. Okay, this is the water quality in the Little River watershed. In 2009, we based water quality data on the report that DEEP is required to send to Congress every 2 years. It's the Integrated Water Quality Report. And at that time, there were 5 different water bodies in the state, in the watershed, that were listed as not meeting the water quality guidelines for Connecticut. Little River and Putnam, below the water treatment plant, wasn't meeting water quality expectations, and they were measuring that at Murphy Park, where there was formerly a swimming area that's no longer there. 2005, the dam was breached and they removed it, but the data up until that time indicated high levels of E. coli bacteria in the river, source not known, and that impairment is still remaining because there's no evidence it's been remediated. That might change this summer. I'm hoping we can get some data to show a change. Roseland Lake's been on the list since the list was created. Muddy Brook above Roseland Lake has high E. coli levels in it. Muddy Brook between Moss Brook, which comes out of Massachusetts, and Route 197 at that time was listed as not supporting aquatic life use. So like it wasn't fishable. There was something wrong with the river that impaired the ability for fish and other aquatic organisms to survive there. The same with North Running Brook from a farm ditch to Muddy Brook. So that's what we wrote that plan based on. The most current integrated water quality report, which we're using right now until the 2022 one is finalized and released. Roseland Lake still on the list. Muddy Brook, no change. And Little River and Putnam, no change. Added to that list was Peckham Brook, which has high E. coli levels in it. We discovered that after we put some gutters on a dairy barn, and we tested below the farm ditch that drained into Peckham Brook and above the farm ditch, and lo and behold, the levels were higher above the farm ditch. We never showed the gutters made a difference, but there was a high level of bacteria in Peckham Brook, so it's added to the list. And Muddy Brook in North Woodstock and North Running Brook have been removed because of changes made in the watershed that allowed those fish to go back and thrive in those locations. There's other water quality assessments that have been going on. This is using volunteers in the Last Green Valley Water Quality Monitoring Program, as well as a program that was run out of Connecticut Audubon Society in Pomfret, using insects as bioindicators of water quality. This is a way to assess streams for aquatic life support, or the ALICE requirements. And you can see the border between Woodstock and Thompson. Let's see if I can point out, oops, that's not going to help. Let's go back here. We had volunteers collect data, English Neighborhood Brook, North Running Brook, Peckham Brook, Gravelly Brook, and Mill Brook. And we found a good diversity of pollution sensitive bugs. That's what all those stars are. And Putnam, Little River and Putnam and South Woodstock it still continues to have on and off issues with water quality for supporting the bugs. And so it is sometimes good and sometimes not, and that could have something to do with flow. What's not shown on this map was last year's sampling. We did Muddy Brook in North Woodstock. I got permission from Craig Sherman to go on Muddy Brook just below his farm, and there was a great diversity of these pollution sensitive bugs there. And with the Woodstock Academy students, we did Little Brook, which is a small stream that flows into Peak Brook. And it also had a very good diversity of bugs. Those are unofficial results because that's my assessment. The official assessment from the DEEP experts has not been published yet. So there's a lot of healthy waters in the Little River watershed. We just have some struggles in some parts of the town that we're hoping to address. The town of Woodstock maintains a bathing beach at Muddy Pond, which is the headwater of Muddy Brook in North Woodstock, right at the Massachusetts border. The Northeast District Department of Health staff tests that water weekly every summer and shares the data with me. And I can tell you that data shows that Muddy Pond meets the strict beach water quality standards. No water quality issues that far up in the watershed from a recreation impairment status. There's a lot of aquatic invasive species in that lake. There's a big problem with variable milfoil, but that's not what we measured with this parameter. We've also done some other water quality testing. In Roseland Lake, we're looking for cyanotoxins. As I said, cyanotoxins is a concern because these are molecules that are toxic to mammals, including people, dogs, cows, anything. It's a byproduct of metabolism that sometimes these cyanobacteria make and sometimes they don't. And it's not fully understood why they do sometimes and why they don't sometimes, but we did test Roseland Lake in 2020 and it was a non-detect, and you can see the water quality conditions we were testing. We took that green paint looking scum off the surface of the lake, sent it up to the EPA lab, and it was a non-detect. So that's positive news. Again, Eric McPhee apologized he couldn't be here today. The Department of Public Health Drinking Water Division keeps records on well water quality. There's 27 different types of community wells in Woodstock that have to report annually to the Department of Public Health what their well water quality is. We have asked for a list of, we've asked for the reports for the past 5 years so we can look through it just to see if there's any indication of water quality issues in groundwater, because there's no monitoring wells in Woodstock that like USGS maintains. So we're looking for any water quality we can get. I have no reason to believe we're going to find elevated nitrate, nitrogen, or pathogens in the water quality. I think we would have heard about that if that were the case, but I can't say it's not there until I look at the data. So that's one of the partners in this project. They obviously have a very big role in protecting drinking water for people, both groundwater and surface water sources. And that's one of the sources we're looking into.
Jean,
Yes,
could I ask a question?
you may.
What is the status of the Saltshed water situation in West Woodstock now? Do you know?
That I can't answer to right now, and that's actually in the Natchog watershed, not Little River, but
Yeah.
that is what Lisa's referring to is there is a cluster of homes in Woodstock Valley that are near the state salt shed that had elevated levels of salt in their drinking water wells to the point where the water was not potable. And I believe they were working on re-drilling all those wells for the people and hoping that the results would be that they went to deeper source, those problems would be gone. I haven't heard any updates, Lisa, so I can't tell you more about that. So anyway, Northeast District Department of Health, if someone has a issue with elevated nitrate nitrogen, or E. coli in their wells, they would be given a report, and we've requested data for them. We have not received it yet. And this is a big one. The town of Putnam Water Pollution Control Authority, because they withdraw water from Little River about 2 miles downstream of Roseland Lake. They've been given the authority to manage Roseland Lake upstream of their drinking water source for all the cyanobacteria and other algae blooms that impact the water quality downstream. And we had recommended they do some more testing, and they followed through with that. That was part of the Roseland Lake Management Plan. They have hired a consultant to do this testing for them, but they have not been so quick to share the data. I'm still requesting that data so we can see what the current conditions are and how they've changed their management strategy. But unfortunately, no one from Putnam is available to represent them at this meeting today. So stay tuned. We will eventually have that information. I'll be needing it to include in the report, so we'll get it one way or the other. NRCS, Maura, would you like to send Bill Purcell's report? Read his Bill Purcell's report today. He couldn't be here today because of a meeting conflict.
Sure. So Bill has reported that NRCS recently certified a waste storage facility project that was done in collaboration with ECCD and Connecticut DEEP. Also, 2 producers in the Little River watershed renewed their conservation stewardship program, or CSP, contracts for another 5 years. And those include no-till, diverse cover crops, and nutrient management enhancements. And then finally, 1 producer in the watershed is starting a calf bedded pack facility in April to get calves and their manure under a roof. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Maura. Again, it was unfortunate that we scheduled the meeting and another meeting got scheduled at the same time, and it was mandatory for them to be there. So that's why I'm recording this meeting, so Bill has the ability to come back and listen in, seeing that NRCS is a sponsor for this project, the water quality management plan. Carol, do you have anything to add?
No, I appreciate the fact that Bill put in the report so that because I didn't have all the details at my fingertips. I did want to add, there was the question about practices that might be ineligible under the CAFO general permit for the EPA funds. I did want to say that NRCS does not have a similar restriction, that under EQIP policy, practices that are required under a state, federal, or other permit could still potentially be eligible for EQIP. So it's not an automatic no on that under EQIP. And then just trying to get caught up on where you are with your NWQI with the plan. Right now, the Little River is in what we call the planning stage. You are officially a watershed under the NWQI, but in the planning stage rather than the implementation stage. And in order to move into the implementation phase, We would, of course, need that approved plan, which would have to go through review, et cetera, and then be added and change your status over into implementation to make you eligible for funding for projects. So eagerly awaiting your progress there.
Well, we'll have a summary of our schedule at the end of this meeting.
Great.
So
Jean, there
you.
was a message in the chat. Did
I
you
see
see that?
I
Okay, did
do.
you want to?
Yes, it's this is from Dory, who lives in East/North Woodstock, and she's wondering about research on the silt loads in brooks in the woodland areas. Her tributary to Muddy Brook has widened over the years, and plants such as water moss are now located with silt all winter. I assume this is from increased winter rain and changes from introduced earthworms. Am I seeing any effects on aquatic insects or increased silt in lakes? Is any data collecting happening? At this point, as far as data collecting, I do not have funding to do data collecting for this type of water quality investigation. We have in the past received money from a 319 grant when we were doing the Roseland Lake Management Plan. And we were working also with the Department of Public Health to collect samples and have them assessed at their lab at Rocky Hill. But we don't have that arrangement right now. If you have specific concern, Jory, let me know, and maybe we can come over and take a look to see if, we could start a database if that's an issue. That's my best answer right now. But right now there's no data gathering, especially for suspended solids or anything in the watershed. But I can say that there's been a lot of increased short-term heavy precipitation events that has, that always has changes in the watershed. Kyra Jacobs was invited to this meeting, and she normally would be here, but it happens to be the week she's on vacation. But I want you to know that we're working with EPA on what are the best models to use for estimating load reductions from different sources, mostly in this project, agricultural sources. And Steve Winnett's been weighing in on that as well, giving us some suggestions on which ones to use to get that best, the balance sheet that we're looking for. I mean, what's the best bang for the buck? This is how much nutrients can be reduced if we use this practice, and this is what that practice costs. And that's part of what we're working on in this plan. So the EPA has been involved in this plan, whether or not they're at the meeting. Oh, and I guess I could talk about this, because those that don't know this, I'm a longtime member of the Woodstock Conservation Commission, and this is not related to agriculture, but it is related to trying to reduce nutrients running off properties. In this case, people's lawns, and impairing water quality. So instead of talking about concepts like total suspended solids and pH and stuff, we decided to focus on something that people could do positively in their yards, that they can see a change, and it would indirectly have an impact on improving water quality. And that's the Pollinator Pathway Initiative. This is an initiative that was begun in the Pacific Northwest area and is spread across the country. And Woodstock has joined the Pollinator Pathway Northeast group, and we're working with our neighboring towns now to encourage, but not require, people to voluntarily change their landscaping practices to incorporate more native plants into their landscape, and therefore support our native pollinators, bees, butterflies, moths, etc. When you put more native plants in your landscape, you're reducing your lawn, and we're also asking people to avoid using fertilizers and reducing pesticides, because pesticides will make plants not edible to caterpillars, which are important if you want butterflies. And if they make their lawn better habitats for pollinators, they're also going to be making their lawns have less pollution leaving them. So that's an initiative that we had been working on for 3 years. We rolled it out at COVID, and so it's been really tough. But there's a meeting coming up on April 6th, 7 p.m. at the Woodstock Town Hall. We're going with a live meeting, and I've invited Lydia Pan, who's the president of the Mountain Laurel chapter of, oh my gosh, I always forget the name of it. Speak up, Maura.
Wild ones.
Wild Ones, which is an organization that is promoting the use of native plants. So it's a free presentation. I'm sure there'll be lovely pictures, and we'll be handing out materials in support of this project. But I think it fits into the overall scheme of source water protection or anything in Little River, because it impacts the whole town. And we are inviting people from neighboring towns as well. So anybody who wants to come hear the presentation is welcome. I could not get anybody from Wyndham Land Trust to be present at the meeting because of the work schedules they have, but I did get an update from Andy Reznikevich. This is a major project that's been ongoing from the Wyndham Land Trust. For those that don't recognize the map, the blue area is the Army Corps of Engineers property associated with the West Thompson Lake Flood Control Project. And you can see Roseland Lake in this map. It's labeled, and all the green and yellow is preserved land on the Bull Hill Ridgeline. And that's all for the most part, that land is in the Little River Watershed. Some of it is on the source water protection side, and some of it is on the outside that goes into Wheaton Brook, which joins Little River near Putnam Recreation Park. But that's a major land conservation initiative that's happened since 2009. And in that time, they've been able to conserve approximately 1,000 acres of land on that ridge line and to keep it from being developed. And when it comes to water quality protection, the best water quality land cover, best land cover for water quality is forests, and those forests will be protected along the ridge line. And that's a really awesome achievement. So I thought I'd include that in here. They also have other protected lands in Woodstock, but this is the big one that happened since 2009. No representatives from the Woodstock Agricultural Commission unless they joined late, but I just wanted to mention that they have been supportive of our efforts on the Little River Watershed-based plan. One, helping to advertise our Farm Talk series, and they also were assisting us with that farm inventory that we're working on. So I wanted to give them credit here, and I don't know what their current initiatives are. And at this point, I'm going to open it up. Does anybody else have other updates that I should have included but didn't, in terms of anything in the Little River Watershed?
This isn't our watershed particularly, but I just heard from somebody who's involved at Sealy Brown that the board of directors agreed that they will turn 8 acres of what was their lawn into a wildflower meadow.
Oh, that's awesome. Like Amy asked me about,
It was
what she
Amy, yeah.
recommended. Yeah, that's awesome. That's great to hear that. That's in the Mashmucket watershed. Anything else? That's very encouraging to hear something on that scale.
Yeah.
Jean, this is Eric.
Yes, Eric?
Oh, go ahead. Lisa, do you have more?
No, thanks.
Okay. You mentioned, Jean, a slide or two ago about the work from Wyndham Land Trust and the Bull Hill area. And although you have several members from the Conservation Commission, and at least Woodstock, on this call, I thought it was important to kind of point out that the broad statewide forest management or forest action plan that was developed a year and a half ago or so, I think it's dated 2020, had been updated a couple years ago. There's a really nice story map that's out on that forest action plan, and it has an interactive GIS map. And I thought that it might be helpful, especially for some other people on this call or maybe reviewing this webinar later on, to realize that there are some priority forest habitat areas within the Little River watershed that may not necessarily come to mind to some stakeholders. The Bull Hill would be a great example of a major conservation effort right now. But there are parts of North Woodstock that have some priority watershed forested areas because of either core forest or some habitat considerations. So I'll put a link in the, I think I just did actually put a link in the chat. If people are interested in, or want to share that story map, it's a web browser enabled visual story that talks about this statewide action plan that our agency has been very active in initiating and updating the last couple of years with stakeholder input from all over the state, from conservation groups, forest planners, private businesses, timber harvesters, forest product people. And I just thought it would be a nice way to kind of complement the water quality aspects and some of the ag focused work that has been described today, and keeping in mind that in Connecticut, agriculture is defined to include forest products and forest
Absolutely.
operations. And I hadn't heard that really being discussed today, and maybe that's something that could be considered to be brought into this collaborative as some of the forest practitioners could explain or give some of their perspectives. And knowing also that some of the agricultural producers, including some on this call today, have substantial forest cover and maybe even management properties on their own properties that are typically grazing or pasture or crop fields. They also have forest land as well. And that might be something that the collaborative could benefit from hearing and maybe including a little bit more. And excuse me if you've already been considering that. I just didn't hear about that discussion today.
It is on
I had a
my
couple other
radar
things.
screen. Go ahead.
Okay, I had a couple other things, but I'll hold off for a second, see if anybody had any comment on that. And if not, when Maura, I think, was listing earlier about outreach that you've been doing as part of your planning update, what struck me, at least in the two events that you mentioned, is that there didn't seem to be anything focused in on the actual community of the town of Putnam. And I'm wondering whether, although we've had some struggles, to say the least, getting consistent participation from Putnam officials with this collaborative, Putnam stakeholders are significant, obviously, for all the efforts you've done. I don't have to repeat that, but I'm just wondering whether that's something that could be considered, that the outreach events should have a particular focus, and maybe it just needs some extra work to find ways to get into the Putnam community, whether they're the recipients or the water customers or the broader base that supports the tax base to Putnam, economic development, Putnam, and others that rely on the healthy watershed conditions in the Woodstock, Thompson, Putnam area. So just curious if anybody had any feedback, but I guess that was just an area I thought that might want to be brought up today.
Yeah, it's a touchy area because I've been hoping to get the town officials to participate without going behind them to talk to the stakeholders first. So that's something that we're behind the scenes working on strategies on how to best manage this. So, but it is on my radar screen as well. And yes, forestry is something that I did plan to include in the watershed-based plan because it is agriculture in Connecticut and there are NRCS programs that focus on forest conservation. Yes. I just wanted to make sure from NRCS first if that would be something that could be included in the, if there a funding pot was created for NACWE, and maybe Carol can answer this, would some of those forest conservation programs be something that we could add into the, this, in our goals.
I am not, Nancy Furlow is truly your expert on the NWQI and what that watershed-based plan needs to include. I will get back to you. I know that Connecticut is very interested in working with forest owners. We have a long history of working with them through a number of programs. And I know that the NWQI has expanded to include source water protection, and I know that the water, that the forestry practices are tightly tied to that. So before I give you a definitive answer, I will defer to Nancy and send that on to her.
Okay. Just to go on to what Eric was saying, the last Green Valley had done an initiative with forestry. They're still working on their regional conservation partnership program. Then it was focused on conservation easements for forest land, and they had an overwhelming response to limited funds, and we're not able to fund everything. And I've been in discussions with them on maybe like giving us an indication of how many forest landowners had applied for that funding so that we could include it in the plan, but I just didn't bring that up today. So thank you for that suggestion, Eric. Any other comments? Well, this will be the last slide, and this is our next steps. And then we'll just open it up for people to have conversation. We're going to continue to assess the needs for funding to support conservation practices. And we hope to have our first draft ready by early summer so we can present an overview of it in a public meeting and get feedback. And then we're going to solicit comments from all the stakeholders to get them more involved in the planning process, make sure we represent everybody. And that would include, I believe, the recipients of the water downstream. And then we'll revise the plan and present it to the USDA for their approval, or if we need to do revisions. But the whole project needs to be wrapped up by September 30th. So that's the schedule we're on. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And anybody who wants to say anything, Tyra, do you have anything from Thompson? You have a very small part in the watershed, but it's a lot of it's under the Bull Hill Ridge line. Is Norman Hill Farm still a dairy farm, or they just have cows? But they still have cows up there, but I don't think they're milking anymore.
As far as I am aware, there's not a dairy farm on that side, but I can't say that I'm 100% on that. I was just looking at the map that you had pulled up of the Bull Hill area, and it is, I don't know how recent that is, but I can tell you that Thompson's Planning and Zoning Commission and Board of Selectmen did agree to transfer some of the town-owned landlocked parcels that are contiguous with Wyndham Land Trust properties to the land trust last year, or possibly even late the year before. So I don't know if that map is totally updated, but that was one of the last things that our former conservation agent, the late Carolyn Wurge, worked on before she passed. So you might want to double check that. I mean, I'm new to this group and not really sure what role I can play with you. But, you know, happy to be a part of it. I mean, my observation is that the area that is within Thompson in this watershed is perhaps less vulnerable than some of the other areas, partly because of all that Bull Hill property in there. But it's difficult for me to say. I'm sort of coming in cold here.
Okay, I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to learn about this initiative. Like I said, there's a small part of the watershed that is in Thompson that drains towards the drinking water side, and then of course Wheaton Brook on the other side. For those that don't know where Wheaton Brook is, if you're leaving Woodstock and you're heading towards Cumberland Farms and the road splits to Providence Pike and Woodstock Avenue. There's a small brook that goes under the roads there. That's Wheaton Brook. But up in the Bull Hill area, I guess it's like pretty pristine until it gets into the more developed part of Putnam, at which point the watershed is pretty highly impacted by developed land. But that's downstream of the drinking water supply, and there's not any agricultural land that I'm aware of in that watershed, at least according to the land cover maps that we have access to. On the Woodstock side, there is one farm that's right on the border with Woodstock and Thompson. And we did go up on our windshield survey and confirm there's still cows in the barn, but I don't think they're milking anymore. Well, that's one of the things we have to follow up to make sure they're not, or if they are, that's good, but we need more information on that. Any other comments?
I just had a question. How big now is Fairview Farm? Do you know how many cows they're milking?
I don't have that number off the top of my head, but I believe, Eric, you said they would likely qualify as a large CAFO.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
That's my understanding. I thought we might have somebody on the call today, but I guess she's not here.
Yeah. And I just want to give a plug for, I can't see myself here. Let's see if I'm showing you this properly. I don't know. Have you read this book? Anybody? Oh, it's backwards. Pastoral Song by James Rebanks, which is a wonderful history of his farming family in the north of England and going through the modern ways of farming and then coming back to everything we're talking about now and trying to restore watershed and diversity on his family's farm. James Rebanks, Pastoral Song.
Thank you. Any other information or comments? Well, we just wanted to give you an update of where we were and just to discuss things and what's going on in the watershed. So I think we've pretty much covered anything. If anybody has any last thing they want to add, please do. Otherwise, let's see, I got one more thing in the chat. Oh yeah, there's a fact sheet on the CAFO. Eric did put that in the chat. If anybody wants to copy any of these links, you can do so before I close the meeting. And other than that, or you can contact me if you need the links. Thank you all for coming, and I look forward to sharing with you further updates as they come along. Have a nice day, everybody. It's supposed to be nice.
Thank you all.
Thank
We
you.
look forward to
Thank you,
hearing.
Jean.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.